Excellent. Okay, so it seems that we are recording. Can I ask you to please mute? I can still hear some background noise, some paper noise. Can you just make sure you mute? Thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody. I hope you actually can see my slide. I believe you can. Excellent. So I just want to go very quickly go through the list of those in this group because Mary is kindly taking notes, so we just want to record who is on the call. We are not going to do any roundtable introduction. We did it last time, and it's going to take much actually. So perhaps when you later have any specific comments, I'll ask you to say who you are and very briefly tell you, which group you belong to and what's your affiliation. I'm going to go just very quickly through the list that I have in front of me, and I know there are a few people on the call which are not the members, but we can add you into the minutes as we go along. So, George, are you on the call?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Remember to unmute if you need to say yes, or just type in the chat. Mohammed, are you on the call? No. Tanya, I believe we have apologies for Tanya. Helen, Michael,
yes, Susan, I am.
Hi, Michael. Can you we have apologies from Alan Derry. Michelle, apologies as well. Ian, you are on the call.
This is Ian, I'm on the call, yep.
Excellent. And Carol is on the call as well. I can see you.
Yes. Hello.
Excellent. Alejandra is here. Jeffrey Gress.
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Melissa, I believe you are too. And
yep, I'm here.
Thank you. And with you, it's Matt Brash, which is not on the list. So Mary's going to capture his name. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
And I should have said that actually Norma Morrison, which is with the Carol group as well, is on the call. So we're going to capture your name too.
Hi.
Marcelina Avris? No.
Yeah.
Michael Huerta? Oh, Marceline, you are there. Hi.
I am.
Mike Huerta? Henyoy Kim?
Yes.
Apologies if I'm misspelling your name.
It's close enough.
Thank you. Stephen Kleinstein, I believe you are. Yes,
yep.
I can see you. Jared Lyle? No. Ron Margolis? I know that the NIH group has a retreat, so perhaps we're not going to have many NIH officers. Matthew McCauliffe? Kevin Reed?
Hello.
Brilliant. Philippe is here, myself here. Adi Sophia?
Yes, I'm here.
Brilliant. Hi. John Starr, you are there.
I'm here.
Kui Tao? Shraddha Sakar from the FDA?
Yes, I'm there.
Hi, Shraddha, you are standing for Weda Tong, I know as well. Yes. Weda send apologies to Mary's here because she's taking notes. John Westbrook? John Westbrook, I can see you as well.
Yes.
Ryan Winslow send apologies. And Hua, I believe, might be still away. Okay, so I believe we captured everybody. Yes?
Susanna, just an update, was back, and I think he's calling in right now.
Ah, okay, brilliant. Thank you, Anu. Is anybody else on the call whose name is not yet on our website and mailing list? Okay, so if you are not on this list on the screen, please drop an email to me because Stephanie will put you on the list, on the mailing list. Otherwise, you are not receiving, you won't receive the updates. Okay, so let's go very quickly. What we're going to do today is a very quick recap regarding the scope of the group and where we are, because some of you were not on the call we had last month. So, and of course there have been progresses, and the idea is that I'm going to give an update of an overview of what the group is and what we have done, and then I'm going to hand it over to Filippo and Alejandra for the latest work and then what needs to be done next, okay? So, first of all, the description of the metadata working group within BioCASD is on the website, along with the name of the people. All the files are now completely open. You don't have to log in anymore. This is a joint effort between the BioCASD Center and another BD2K center called Center for Expanded Data Annotation and Retrieval, CEDAR, whose PI is Mark Wilson in Stanford. Because there is a very common focus on metadata. That's exactly why it's a joint activity. There is also another metadata working group, which is cross BD2K Center, which is led by Mark, representing CEDAR, and George Alter, representing BioCASD. And which also, and we also link it with that group and with activity and elixir. So we're trying to outreach as much as possible. But those two groups have very specific and slightly different focus. This working group here also depends and synergize with other activity and with the BioCASD. So we are not supposed to do everything for BioCASD, but focus around metadata and work with other working groups. We are really leveraged on the work done by a workshop in March around use cases that George chaired and collected an initial set of use cases which have been later announced. This activity is also very closely related to the working group 4 in BioCASD, which focused on use cases and test benchmark. And of course, what we are doing here is very closely related to the development team, the core development team in BioCASD, which is co-led by Hua and by Jeff. Okay, so what is the goal of this working group, the working group 3 on metadata within BioCASD? We need to define a set of metadata specifications that support the ability of the data discovery index, the prototype that is being designed, to meet the requirements outlined by the submitted use cases. And if you want to know more about that and about the general scope of the BioCASD in the prototype, I really want to I refer to the white paper, which has plenty of detail about that. The idea is that we know that there is a lot of metadata and there are lots of use cases. So we are going to tackle the definition of metadata in an iterative manner. And somehow, broadly speaking, we are going to have two phases. The phase 1, which is somehow need to end this month, is that we need to identify the core set of metadata. When I say core, I meant common to any type of study, any type of subject use or technology used within the life sciences, of course. And then we know that we need to start extending this core metadata to perhaps more than one domain-specific area to cater for specific questions, for specific use cases. So the use cases are very important because the use cases and the competency question which we have derived from the use cases will help us define the boundary and the level of granularity for the metadata. But we already know in advance that we might not be able to answer all the questions in full. And of course, we will have to define what the boundary is, what the question that the DDI will be able to answer, which one will be able to answer only in part, or perhaps which one are out of scope. So the phase 1 of the work has already started back in May. So let me tell you where we are now and where you can find all the files I will refer to. So from the website and the working group page, on the left-hand side menu, there is a link to group file. There are two sets of files. You find all the minutes of the teleconference, all the presentation, and the records of these teleconferences. on one side, and in the Google Drive, you find all the working files, all the drafts that I will refer to now, and there is no need to log in. You actually have access, and you can actually have ability to comment on all the Google files that I will mention now. So there are particularly four Google files which have been created. The first one is called the standard operating procedure. There is a file that covers the use cases and the competency question. There is a file which is more as a spreadsheet covering the metadata mapping, the mapping of the different schema. And then there is an important one, which is the core metadata elements. So the results of the mapping and the results of extracting the competency questions are going into the core metadata elements file, the number 4. This is just also to acknowledge the people that have done the work, particularly Alejandra, Philippe, my team, Mary, Vardigan with George team, and then we have had contribution from many of you, and hopefully we will have even more contribution. We are naming the one in particular who actually did add comments on the document, but we hope to have actually more than that. Sorry, Carol, yes, I see that Ian is on the call. We will make sure we get his name on the notes. I'm reading the chat. Okay. So very quickly what these documents are about, the reason why we put together an SOP, a standard operating procedure, because we wanted to outline exactly what we are doing, how we are doing it. So, and also we want to use this document to collect all the existing efforts and schema that we are reviewing it, to make sure that we are aware of them and explain the reason why they were selected for in the mapping and etc. We are also defining the approach which has been used to derive the core metadata elements, and there are two approaches. There's a bottom-up approach and a top-down one. So the top-down is we use the use cases to understand what people want to query about and understand the metadata element needed to fulfill those queries. There is the bottom-up, we look at existing metadata schema and see what metadata element those schema has, and use the combination of both approaches, which is giving us the core list of metadata that we need. We also keeping track of the schema that we are mapping, creating a collection under biosharing, which is just a list of these efforts and where the schema are, so that they are simply accessible and as a record for the future. Okay, so the second document is this competency question document. This was collected over time at the workshop back in March that George chairs, but we also had submitted use cases from different NIH groups, from the NIH itself and from Fieldborne itself. The questions have been somehow digested and abstracted so that we could identify easily the metadata elements and color code them to categorize them, so to help in the creation of the core set and in the model at the later stage. The third file is the mapping file. It's simply a set of metadata schema where actually compares so that we could extract common elements from this metadata schema. We are keeping track of which metadata schema we've used, which version, and etc. So everything is traceable and we can go back in time. And we can keep adding, of course. Right, so the final list, as I say, it's a file, it's the important one. It's where we are now, using the bottom-up approach, which is the mapping, and using the top-down approach, which is the use cases. We come up with a list of core metadata elements, which now need to be defined, structured, and modeled, and then they go actually to the developer team, and they can start actually implementing it. From here on, I'm going to actually hand it over to Alejandra, which will explain exactly how these core elements have been created, which one they are, and then simply we open up to comments because we want your comments and view during the call and after the call on the core metadata elements.
Right, so as Susanna mentioned, so one of the steps we followed was to take the competency questions and highlight the different elements, entities that are relevant for the queries and that we need to represent in the model. Once all the competency questions were grouped and collected from the different workshops and white papers, etc., by Philippe and Mary. So this highlights of an identification of entities and some of the relationships too was then processed to classify them and bin them in different groups. And of course, this is not exhaustive, nor is a representation, a formal representation at all. It's just a grouping of the elements so that we could come up and identify the different entities. So many of these are actually instances that helped us identify, and they, as you can see here, they are grouped by use case so that we can trace back the different entities and how they need to be in the model justified by a particular use case. So then in the core metadata elements file, we identified the different entities and different properties, and we've been adding definitions. All of this will be revised when we come up with a formal model of these different entities and their relationships. But we've been working on identifying the cardinality and the link back to the relevant competency question. Our intention is also, I mean, the cardinality will give us also the requirement level, and when available, we will link back to the different schemas. So to join the two approaches, the bottom-up and the top-down, from the use cases and from the schemas that help us identify the importance of the different attributes. So here we put together, so these, you can revise the spreadsheets and make comments, please. And we are grateful for all the comments we received. But here, to show you and more in a schematic form, we've developed this diagram that is not at all exhaustive, and it's mainly the entities without their attributes. But this is to explain the main entities we've identified as part of the model and the relationships between them. Yeah. So as expected, the main entity would be the data set, and for that, the use cases identified, of course, we need to track the source of the data set, so the repository where it's coming from, and the relationship with the study that produced the data set. We have some conventions on the color coding. We will be adding a legend, but basically we are identifying the different entities, the processes, in blue, like the study, and in orange, we refer to entities that might be, that will be coming from external resources. Such is the case of biological process. So, so the use cases also identify the clear relationship with the publication. So this is something we want to keep track of. And the publication will be related to the different authors and organizations. So we identify person that then will play different roles. So it's an investigator in the study, for example. Then one other important thing is to consider the funders and the different grants and how the grants will be related with the publications on the data set. And the study in this case, so you might see that, so as I said, this is not necessarily exhaustive, so there might be other relationships, but we didn't want to clutter the diagram. And we relied, as we said, on the use cases. So we had a use case relating the study and the grant, for example. Now, so this part of the diagram up to here is in some of the cases related to the generic schemas we consider, even though there are some specific things like biological process that weren't available. But the rest of the things are more life science specific. So with the study, we need, through the use cases, there was a need to identify the different study subjects and in turn to group them in groups or cohorts. So depending on the clinical domain, we could have different labels. Again, in terms of the labels, we try to follow other schemas and consensus, but we are welcome on discussions on the different labels and how they could be generalized or better understood. Again, we aim to put definitions on each of them, and we will continue to work on that in the formal model as the phase 2. The study also defines an intervention that is a treatment. In some cases, again, we are not saying that all of these relationships are compulsory. And the treatment here highlighted in gray, you can see attributes that we think are important coming from the use cases that need to be addressed in terms of queries. So in terms of the study subject, it's important to identify the organism, and this was present in several of the use cases. It's derived from a specimen, and it presents a phenotype. With this phenotype, we wanted to encapsulate many of the queries that are about disease and other phenotypes. The study also has part molecular entity, and this is, again, we are assuming that it can be relied upon external resources where the metadata should be linking to those. And the last part of the diagram is more about the process of the data acquisition and how the data is structured in terms of dimensions. So here you can see that the data acquisition technology will have the data set as an output. It's used by an instrument. Uses an instrument, sorry. So the instrument is used by the data acquisition technology. Similarly, we need to identify the software used. And the data acquisition will measure what we call the dimension, and with this we want to identify the different, either measured or observed, actually, elements in the experiment, such as signal intensity or gender, if it is an observation. So, okay, let me finish. Okay, there. So the final bit is relating to the analysis process that will have either, so the data set could be input or output of different analysis process, and we want to relate the analysis process to the software used in such analysis. Philippe, maybe you want to add something?
Right, yeah, just one thing that is, sorry for jumping in, one thing that we have identified as well is the need to highlight the fact that data sets have to conform with a number of specifications, and those would be, again, here we identify information resource in orange, meaning that we would be relying on external sources if those use cases need to be answered. Otherwise, we would have to expand within the current model to cover things such as policies, format specification, and guidelines.
Okay, so that's an overview of the different entities we've identified. And you can see more details in the spreadsheet.
Yes, exactly. So the point is, this is just to try to be able to give an overview, but the details are definitely in the core metadata element spreadsheet. we want to open to question, and I see already one question from Carol. Please.
A quick question. Are those like different colors represent different type of? Because some like data says is yellow, study is blue. Does that mean anything? The color?
Yes, it does. So in blue, you can see processes, material. It's identified. Yeah, we need to add the legend. Sorry about that. The material is specified in purple, and then in yellow we have information entities, and you can see in gray the attributes, so that are not part of the entity.
Okay.
We're going to add the label. We're going to add the label before even we post the slide, so that will be clear. I see some comments on the chat. 1 second. So, Carol, do you want to, Carol and then Melissa, just in order the way you typed it?
Yeah, so this was very, very helpful because it inspired me to think of some other ontologies and models that we hadn't listed before. And in particular, the one that I'd missed out was Serif in the Eurocris world, which ties studies to grants and peoples and organizations and is an incredibly well-established standard. So I've added that into the SOP.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, we consider it through RIS-CS, which is aligned to Sirius, so, but we can revise that also. Thank you very much.
Melissa, you had a question too on the chat, I can see.
Yeah, so there's also some similar modeling that's been done in the Vivo ISF Eagle Eye ontologies to relate some of the things that you have on kind of the right side of the diagram here, as well as to people and publications. And we're actually updating that now to be aligned with the new Science CV BioSketch format, which that model would then presumably be used in NIH Commons. So the relationships between people and the outputs that they have, including data sets and the relationships to those things. So I think that will be really relevant, and we'd love to coordinate with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any more comments? Or specific questions, things that are not clear, that we should make it clear?
Well, maybe one thing that we can add, and the reason why we have these orange boxes, again, in the absence of a ranking or priority list for the use cases, we place them pretty much all on the same level of importance. However, we also appreciate the fact that we would not be able to map into details, and we also were aware of existing efforts. So if we take the example of licenses, for instance, there is the Creative Commons vocabulary that allows you to describe licenses in very fine-grained detail, for instance, to cover what a license allows, prohibits, or permits. So in a way, if a resource of licenses is produced, we could tap into it. So that's just to give you an example of how query could be expanded. But if we want to have this information available to the DDI, then we would have to rely on such repository, or we would have to have this information associated to the data set so it can be indexed. Otherwise, we'll miss it. So the version. No, so the question by Carol on the version of software. This is an attribute of the software that is available in the Google spreadsheet that lists the different objects we've identified.
Yeah, so here in the diagram we are just showing the entities, but we've specified some of the attributes for each of these entities in the spreadsheet.
And again, the attributes have been checked against the use cases that we have. So we have a use case that documents which version of the software is being used and which release package and things like that.
I was also just going to add as well, just to sort of frame Carol's question with a bit of a use case as well. Philippe, as you know, you were at the SIN Biochem Group's samples workshop, where we kind of end up with different versions of organisms, if you like, that the molecular entity is modified through some treatment so that the genome of that organism is then changed. So we end up with a different organism or a new version of the same organism by manipulating it. So it might be that we can sort of reuse the same modeling that you have for versions of software, but with the organism.
I guess the key here would be indeed to define, well, how much you need to modify an organism to make it a new one.
Yeah.
And if we consider, genic therapies, for instance, is this the same organism or not? That's still quite difficult. But yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's certainly not the same from a syn biochem perspective. Right. Once you've altered it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why. So I like this representation. I just was thinking about when we implement this, like how challenging it will be to trying to extract all those information when we curating the data sets. Is Jeff here on the call?
I think yes, you should be on the call. It was on the call before.
Yes.
Oh,
sorry, I had to unmute.
All right, Jeff, do you have any comments about if we really need to how to extract all those information for the data set?
Well, I mean, again, it's going to depend on what is in the repository and what other sort of linkages we have to some of the additional data. So, for example, we're talking about citation information for a specific study. The PubMed ID might exist, in the data repository, but all the other information you have to fetch from PubMed. So there might have to be some cross-linkages that way. But it really depends on, what's being provided by the repositories, and what we can extract out of the records themselves, which...
Among all this different kind of information associated with the data set, do we have any kind of priority? Like say, first we want to know the data set is about which phenotype or which molecular, and is there anything like maybe because the users may search those more versus trying to search a grant information.
Just a comment about in terms of the repositories, and of course it will depend on each repository which information of this can be extracted. But that is exactly why we consider in the mapping, and you can see that in the mapping file, many of the formats of existing repositories, and those have been considered. So the coverage might not be complete for all of them, but and this is where you exactly can see on the mapping file.
Yeah. I completely agree. I just trying to, for Jeff and me, think about which type of information have sort of higher priority for us to capture when we build the search engine indexing those data sets. Yeah. But I think is really
I don't think that. I don't think the priority is based on the elements themselves, but it's going to be dependent upon, which repositories we target, because that's going to drive what metadata is available.
Yeah. If we consider, for instance, the representation that we have where we post-treatment as part of study, the attributes in our model mean that treatment may be repeated or occur more than once. So they can be changed, and this is currently absent from, clearly at an automatic representation level from repositories such as Geo or Pride. So it would be difficult to extract with such level of granularity. Some data sets available in Express, for instance, are typed more precisely, and we could recover this information, but in many cases we will have to ramp. We won't have the level of granularity, so we will know that treatment will be available as a string. But that's valid.
I see another comment on the chat from Carol. Carol, do you have a specific?
Oh, yeah, I'm just sort of brain dumping whilst editing your document at the same time.
Okay.
So I'm very much aware of, and Stephanie will also be aware, as well as Melissa, of some recent things done by Elsevier that kind of broke the 411 citation principles. Yes. So, and I was very much aware that we must be very careful that this also supports the 411 citation principles.
Yes. Yes, we've added, we've been considering that, and we've added the information in the SOP. So, but yes, absolutely.
I just was looking there myself. Yeah.
This is Kevin here. I'm just curious, talking about prioritizing, obviously, the metadata. Is there going to be a baseline minimal level of metadata description that will be required, or is this what that is? Will these all be required, or will it be a small piece of that that will actually allow it to be included within the index when it comes time to do that?
When you mean required, and I think this really links back to the discussion that Hua, Jeff, were having before. The point is, we know that the repository out there, which will be the source of data that the data discovery index is going to call, might not have all of this. So the point is that there is another working group by Biocante, which of course will initiate a little bit later, which is engage how to collaborate with the DDI. And this refers to those repositories and the type of metadata that has been identified through the use cases that perhaps those repositories are lacking, and they should consider perhaps adding. So I don't have, personally, I don't have an answer to your question, because it will depend, but I don't know if others from the development team or Ian want to pitch here and answer Kevin's question.
That's basically my previous question. I was thinking, if we have a minimal set or we have some kind of priority list, some of them we must have it. But I also don't have a clear answer for that.
Well, I mean, the clearest answer might be if you look at what the index has to do, right? So it has to provide, links to relevant data sets, and if you're going to display information about those data sets, you're going to need something equivalent to quote unquote a title, which might not be a title. It might be, for example, from you look at the protein data bank, it might be the name of the structure, and a type of description which could be put together from some of the metadata elements available. And so the question is, what is this minimal model might append, in terms of the data itself, but, you will need to have certain items that are then, made visible, to the users.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it was just the idea of what qualifies for inclusion. Like, how much do we need to decide that it's worthy of being described within the catalog and therefore discoverable by others? What is the baseline for providing that amount of information? What metadata elements do we need to include, and is it our job to make those ones required before they can be described within the index? Anyway, thank you.
Well, it's a tricky one, because in a way we had comments where people said, oh, we really want to have information about the grants so that we can track the impact of a program. Other people said, oh, again, publication is key, we need to have this. The other one said, oh, I really want, if the DDI has to deliver something, it has to be about anything related about the terms of use of a data set. Can I recompile or assemble a meta-analysis and redistribute to my own, for instance, commercial use? So, and this is really why now we have to get back to the group to have a for what are the key things that matter here. And also, this is also why we've assembled the presentation by adding the different layers, not in one big block, but you can we could think of module. If you have the grant module, then you can of course expand things, but it should be very modular. So we can focus on metadata elements which are about the study design, others which are about the biology and the disease and phenotype, others that are about the data types. So I would say that's the main thing.
I'd like to add a little comment. This is Joan Starr, and I'm on the call to represent DataCite. So with my DataCite hat on, I'll say that this the little piece of the model over here between dataset and is cited by in a publication. If there's a DOI being assigned to the dataset for reference in the publication, which is certainly what I would recommend, there will be a requirement for the DataCite minimum metadata at that point. And so your system would have to implement a check for required metadata at that point. It's a very small set of required metadata, and you're almost certainly going to have it at that point. But just to answer the question that was raised about required metadata, it would come into play right at that little corner of this model.
Yes, thank you very much. And DataCite was one of the schemas, and actually the first one we consider in the mapping. We hope it will cover this, and this is why on the core metadata, so in the spreadsheet, we are not only pointing back to the use case that justifies the inclusion of the different entities and attributes, but also we want to complete it with the schema element, and this is where DataCite definitely is playing an important role. So we've already started that process with DataCite.
Yes, I just thought I would put it to voice.
Yeah, excellent.
There is also a comment on the chat from Marcy Harris. Marcy, if you want to elaborate on that, please. If you're still on the call, which I believe you are. Marceline? Okay, so maybe you are on mute. There you are.
on mute, sorry.
Please. Do you want to elaborate on your comment, Marcy?
Oh, about the secondary data sets.
Yes.
So one of the things that's happening, obviously, is, especially in linking genetic data with clinical data, is that we're taking data from primarily transactional systems like electronic health records, right, and creating analytic files that get pulled into other studies. And I think establishing the traceability of those data is maybe out of scope for this project, but it seems like it's something that should be modeled in here. And then there's the issue of just, combining multiple analytic, kind of research curated data sets for additional studies that seems to be missing on the model.
I believe, and I actually expressly split an answer to extent. I think this was also a comment from George, if I remember correctly, George, the importance of having the relation that somehow I believe DataCite has, the relation between one data set and another, which I think we got to add in the model. I agree with you. What the discussion was that the point is that this information, the question is this information in the database that we're going to get the data from? Perhaps isn't, but certainly the DDI should have at least the relation, the capability to relate one data set to another and explain the role of the relation.
Yeah, and one of this is Jeff. One of the topics that came up in the other working group on identifiers is that there may not be services to allow the researchers to develop sort of these aggregate data sets, especially if they're across, different databases. So the question is, where does that happen? And is that also something potentially as part of the DDI or some other resource that's out there to help the researchers sort of create these aggregate data sets?
Melissa, I see your comment on the HTLS. Absolutely, the HTLS data set description is one of the mapping and the metadata schema which is being brought in. Absolutely.
Yeah, but that wasn't clear because I also added. I was thinking the same thing with Melissa, and I added that onto the list as well. So it wasn't quite clear that that had been included. It's a very comprehensive here.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things is that you know, a lot of the initial work that was done on defining requirements for the provenance in that working group was really great in terms of really defining all of the sort of minimum needs for provenance when you have data sets that get manipulated and versioned and different people touch them along the way. But we've in our Monarch project, we've actually been doing a lot of testing and really trying to deeply utilize that standard for the provenance of all of the data that we have that actually does experience a lot of different manipulations along the way. And so we've got a lot of good feedback for that, and we're going to be iterating on that. So I'd be happy to have our group present on the outcomes of that at some point.
Sure, definitely. And we, Melissa, we want to have access to the mapping file to be able to link to it. I was just looking at the chat. I saw that the discussion about provenance started from Michael Backstein as well. Now I can see.
Yeah, so but specifically about HTLS, I was involved in the working groups, and we have considered it. So in the SOP, it's listed under the different schemas that we have mapped, and it's also included in the mapping file, both for the generic models and for the life science specific.
Yeah, I think the thing is that no one had really deeply used it yet, and so that's kind of where we're at now. And our first releases actually got a lot of good feedback for how we can do the next iteration. So, but the other comment I had was about how, if anyone has talked about how you can, if you know what standard was, you know, what metadata was applied to one data set, that you should be able to inform other data sets as they're being entered, and if there's any use cases that have been defined for how we might better approach that to make it easier for users to populate their metadata.
I think perhaps this is beyond the scope of the DDI. The only thing we have is that here in the schema that a data set conforms to potentially a standard or use an ontology or something, which is this information here. I can hear lots of typing. Perhaps somebody not muted. Sorry. So yes, but what you're referring to, the template and etc. This is really fell into the remit of the feeder center. So that's not what the DDI is intended to do. But because we are working closely with the feeder, there is a strong relation.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really important because if we want to develop tooling to make it really easy for people to add this content, we want to take advantage of all other content that's been indexed for that purpose, right? So, and there's a lot of ways that you can do that, right, depending on what metadata has been added and what data sets we have in hand.
Yeah, this is what we are exploring in CDR at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you. More comments, suggestions? I think there are 5 minutes left in general. So perhaps just to explain what the next steps are, meanwhile, so the idea is that indeed the schema, what we're going to do, we're going to add the legend to explain the color coding in the slides before I post them and in the spreadsheet. But I think the best way is that the comments come through the spreadsheet, the Google spreadsheet, as have happened so far, because this graphical representation is really very high level, and you cannot see, you know, which use cases those elements are related to, so why they are there. And in the spreadsheet, you can also see where the data progressively, where these elements, in which model they are present And so, you know, that's why they were selected, because they were used by many models. Or if it was the use cases that identify the need for this metadata. So please keep adding comments in there. If you wish, you can even just send them by email to the list, whatever is your preferred way to circulate your comments and suggestions. The other thing that we asked the group last time, and we are going to ask them now as well, is that as we move forward, we need to start identifying conceptual models to formally represent Ian. Okay, so I think some people are progressively leaving, so thank you for those that will leave before the end. I understand, don't worry, because this is the last slide anyway. So we are still, open to comments to identify the conceptual models to actually formally represent the metadata elements, which are the core, so to speak, because as I say, the technology or sample-specific extensions will be considered, will become extensions of this core model. Because we want to make sure that when we have a call, we have something to discuss, and we would like, as I say, to promote the comments happening offline as well, outside the tools. We plan to have the next call in August, early August actually, but as I said, we encourage comments before, but we would like to have something else to come to the group to, to review and to revise and discuss. Any comments perhaps on these next steps, anything to clarify or any suggestion in general? I believe no. Everybody's very quiet, or we have exhausted all the questions, or you're all muted. But I think if nothing, then I really would like to thank everybody for attending the call. Thank everybody who made a comment on the call, offline, and etc. And please keep the comment coming.
Thank you. You have a big job.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. We're going to close the and the file. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.